Welcome everyone to Green College for the first in our Writer in Residence series this academic year. Let me begin the series in a good way by acknowledging that we're gathering today on the traditional, ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam people here in the place that we know today as UBC Green College. My name's Emma Cunliffe. I'm the principal at Green College. For those who don't know know me. And it's my very great pleasure today to introduce our 21st Writer in Residence here at Green College, Clara Kumagai. Clara has already proven to be an indispensable member of our resident community. The emails she sends to the resident members and to me every Wednesday about what she's thinking about, what she's working on, about her meetings with residents, often containing a poem or a song. I love the gloaming, by the way. Yeah, the gloaming are great. Have become a weekly highlight, certainly for me and I think for many resident members. In addition to sending wonderful emails and being a great community member, Clara is from Ireland, Japan and Canada. And her first novel, Catfish Rolling, was a 2024 YOTO Carnegie Medal nominee and winner of the 2024 KPMG Children's Books Ireland Book of the Year. Her second novel, very recently published, Please Wave at Clara, Songs for Ghosts, has just come out, and congratulations on the publication. When not spending time with us here at Green College, Clara lives and writes in Ireland. Clara is going to be in residence at Green College for the next 3 months, and this is the first in a series of events. The other event dates are October the 16th, October the 29th, and November the 19th, and each of them promises to be a real treat. But this evening we're really pleased to welcome and thank Christine Lai, a novelist and essayist who works primarily on art and images. Her debut novel, Landscapes, was named a Best Book of the Year by both NPR and CBC and was longlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize. I know Clara has more to say about Christine's work and that you'll be talking this evening about your work, so I'm going to sit down and shut up and listen, and I'm really excited for tonight. So welcome and thank you, Clara and Christine.
Thank you very much for that welcome, Emma. I'm really pleased to be here. I don't know if I ever thought someone would praise my emails, so that's that's nice to hear. I just want to say hello to everybody, and thank you so much for coming to my first event here at Green College. I'm very, very grateful to be here and to have met and talked to so many of the residents here, and I guess, maybe become part of the community as well. And this event, so it's the first one in the public lecture series that I have curated. It's called Where the Waves Take Us, about art, identity, and the sea. And what I hope it to be is a multidisciplinary exploration of creativity and the ocean, of the relationship between humans and the natural world. And of course, my very first guest here today is Christine Lai, who I'm delighted to be talking to. So I envisioned this series as a way of sort of thinking about our relationship with the ocean, how we envision it, relate to it, traverse to it. As a force of nature, the ocean exerts its influence on us in myriad of ways. And with these events, and as the series as a whole, what I would like it to be is thinking about how we engage with the ocean as like a site of imagination. In some ways, with some guests, we'll be talking about it in kind of very tangible, physical, sensory ways. And in others, kind of thinking about how it exists maybe as a metaphor in imagination and as a site of maybe traversal and in some ways displacement. So I think what we're going to be talking about today, it's sort of about oceans in the wider sense, water, in both of these capacities, but kind of looking at it through the lens of art, and not to start out in a negative note, but kind of about disaster, or at least how we as humans might feel about disaster as the natural world around us changes, right? What we personally see as disaster. And thinking about time and how we remember and commemorate things. So I'll be talking, I guess, primarily about actually my first novel, which is Catfish Rolling. It's not that old. It came out in 2023. But like thematically, I think it will be interesting to talk about today. And of course, we'll be talking about Christine's novel, Landscapes. You should hold it. I should do this. I should hold it up too. Let's put it there. And Landscapes is about many things, but it's set against a near future England in a countryside that's been blighted by flooding and by drought. And we're going to have some images to show you of inspirations, influences on our work as we have our discussion. We're going to do short readings as well, and we'll finish with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please keep them in your mind for the end. And I just wanted to say that as this is the first event, it will also kind of be an introduction to me and my work. And for the other events, I'll be much more like in a moderator role, and I'll be talking much less, just in case, you think it's going to be like so much of me yapping for the next couple of months. It's been wonderful to have like many meals at residence, so maybe they already know this. But just, as the structure of the series, it will be much more of a conversation today. It's my great pleasure to introduce Christine. And Christine Lai, this is a little bit of bio, so I'll just read it again. Christine Lai is a novelist and essayist who writes primarily on art and images. And as Emma said, Landscapes was named as the best book of the year by NPR and CBC, longlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize. Christine's essay on the history and art of picture postcards, which was originally published in Geist magazine, was a finalist for the National Magazine Award. Christine holds a PhD in English literature from University College London and is currently at work on her second novel, which engages with photography and the urban culture of Tokyo. And I met Christine for the first time at Vancouver Writers Festival in 2023. And soon afterwards, I read Landscapes. And I was really struck by so many things in this novel, like first and foremost, the prose, which I think of as so clear and like lucid and crisp, but at the same time is very much imbued with depth and introspection and thoughtfulness. And I think it's a novel that tells many different kinds of stories simultaneously. It's mostly told through the diary of one character, but there are two, characters through which we see the story. It's about art, it's about beauty, it's about the violence that art can aestheticize. It's about the long shadow of a sexual assault, the trauma that comes after, but also the tending to oneself and, surroundings that comes afterwards. But it's also about the trauma that humans have inflicted on the earth and the aftermath that humans must live in. And this is all in a novel that does this very easily. I found it entirely absorbing and so beautiful to read. So I'm really excited to discuss it in more detail. And now I'm going to sit down. Okay, so I guess, Christine, first of all, I would just like to ask you to introduce Landscapes and maybe to speak to some of its initial inspirations. And I'll give you the clicker for some...
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for Green College for hosting this event. And thank you to all of you for being here this evening. That was such a fantastic introduction. I think your introduction is much better than the one I prepared. And I think you cover all the major aspects of the novel. So as Clara said, it's a work of literary fiction that's set in the near future. With a background of environmental devastation. And at the beginning of the book, the protagonist, Penelope, who is an art historian, archivist, she needs to prep and catalog all the items that remain in this house before the demolition of the house, which is meant to be in 7 months' time. And as she is going through the images and the objects, she is also pulled into the past, and she remembers the events that happened to her 22 years before. And most of the novel takes the form of a diary written by Penelope, but there is a second part that is told from the perspective of Julian, who is the man who assaulted her, and that is more of a traditional third-person narrative, and it's almost like a travelogue that follows his journey from Rome back to London via train. And interleaved between these two parts are essayistic fragments on Western art history. So that's kind of the form of the novel. And I suppose early inspiration were definitely a lot of the artworks and images that I was drawn to, and I'll talk a bit more about Turner later, but I was really drawn to photographs that depict ruinous houses throughout Europe. And this is a photo by a Belgium-based artist, Myrna Pavlovich, and she just goes into these abandoned spaces and photographs them. And I find that there's something quite melancholy and moving about these abandoned spaces. And I was really drawn to the country house as a symbol of power. And another source of inspiration were the novels of the German writer W.G. Sebald, which remain very important to me. And there are several ruinous estates throughout his novels, and he talks a lot about the entanglements between architecture and power. So I really wanted to respond to the images as well as to his books through the writing. Yeah, so I'll just read a little bit from the very beginning of the book. Prologue. Throughout his long career, the 19th century English painter J.M.W. Turner returned repeatedly to the Ehrenbreitstein fortress in the German town of Koblenz. For centuries, a fortified edifice stood on the site that overlooks the confluence of two great rivers, the Mosel and the Rhine. Ehrenbreitstein was once a Roman military fort, the home of a holy relic, a symbol of successive regimes of power, and the target of countless attacks. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Prussian defenders lost Ehrenbreitstein to the French army, who destroyed it ahead of their retreat. The fortress lay in this state of devastation when Turner first encountered it on his tour of the Rhineland. On his subsequent visits to the region, he would have seen the rebuilt, grander structure. Yet in his sketches, watercolors, and one major oil painting, Turner depicted not the forbidding battlements of the reconstructed fortress, but the wreckage of the old structure, standing defiantly atop the cliffs. It was as if the painter's eyes overleapt the newly built form, and his gaze continued to be held by the ruins of the half-demolished structure, poised on the threshold between collapse and renewal. Chapter 1, 1st of September. I picture myself standing in the midst of a ruin. All around me there are mildew canvases, rolled up crudely or crammed into drawers. The edges of the papers, mouse-eaten or worm-eaten, fall into heaps of dust. As I work through the disorderly archive and chip away at the mountain of responsibilities, my mind is drawn back to this image of Turner's studio, left in a state of Pompeii-like destruction after the painter's death. That same atmosphere of decay permeates the library in which I spend my mornings. On better days, disorder is forestalled, and there's only the linearity of the catalogue and the neat collection of books and objects. On days of anxiety such as today, I find myself stranded in the wreckage. The dust that has gathered in the corners, the moldy papers, the shelves that bend under the weight of books and archival boxes, all these seem to be advancing towards me, millimeter by millimeter, until they overwhelm me. 2nd of September. A calmer start to the day. A thin column of light shines down from above. Elsewhere, the library's underground storage space is illumined by a solar-powered lamp that is recharged daily on the desiccated lawn. Before I sat down to write, I spent some time admiring the flowers I keep in secret. The earthquake 5 years ago resulted in an irreparable crack down one wall of the library, but plants have forced their way through the fissure and have begun to sprout in the space where books were once stored. Even now, as aridness eats through the outside world, the weeds and flowers that have flourished in the aftermath of disaster are protected by the shadows and nourished by the water from the broken pipe. This spot of green is the only place where I allow water to drip away unchecked. These flowers the only luxury I permit myself to keep in these days of want and longing. It has been almost 3 years since it rained in this part of England. First came the floods, then came the droughts. Here at Mornington Hall, the 1,000-acre parkland is parched, and the remaining leaves crumble between my fingers. Parts of the earth lie fractured, creating intricate webbing that spreads out like dark veins. I never thought I missed the cold, wet air on rainy days. We now count in milliliters, careful not to exceed the amount of water the government has allotted to the house. The small bottles we pass between us are not merely tools of survival, but also mementos of a past that recedes further and further with each passing month. A nature diary composed over the past decade would read like a catalogue of losses. There was a time when catastrophe seemed far away. We glided through the seasons confident that each calendar year would yield the same degree of heat and cold, the same blossoms and migrating birds. Then change became visible. In aerial photographs, the earth, cracked, burnt, and striated by the lines of industry, resembled a painting, and some sought beauty. Nothing is certain, they continue to say. We'll see, we'll see. We have seen, yet the debates have intensified, and some persist in believing the sky to be unchanging, the only immutable thing in a world of fluid truths.
Thank you. Great. That's a wonderful introduction to the novel, and I think to the different sort of tones and forms that it takes as well. So thank you so much for that. I'll talk a little bit about Catfish Rolling. So this and Songs for Ghosts, they're both young adults, or in UK and US and Canada, they often say a bit more like crossover. And you'll see why when I do a little reading from the prologue. So I think, you know, we have a lot of themes and ideas that are similar, but you'll probably hear like quite a difference in tone and voice in terms of mine, because it is narrated by a young person. And I guess like primarily I'm thinking of young people who are reading it. But generally I write in, you know, kind of like different forms. I like trying out different genres, or fiction and nonfiction as well. But I think I always felt like very drawn to writing for young people. I think that literature and reading is really important at that time, and it certainly was for me. And also writing for young adults, there's a lot of inbuilt drama and turbulence and conflict. And a lot of it is pretty internal. And I just think there's a lot to mine there, especially because I think a lot of my stuff is about identity. And Catfish was inspired initially by the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. And I actually started writing it during my MFA here, in the last year of my MFA, which was in 2015. And it got published in 2023, but that's just how long it takes sometimes. So that was the initial inspiration. And it's called sometimes the triple disaster because it was an earthquake and a tsunami and a nuclear meltdown. And all of those disasters kind of take different forms in the novel. It's very influenced by folklore, which I'll talk about a little bit more with the catfish. And it also is moving between times and between memory. Because in this novel, there is an earthquake so large that it broke time in different places in Japan, so that there's different areas where time runs faster or slower than normal, and it's too dangerous for people to live in. So people have been evacuated, and people don't really know what has caused this. So it's a little bit of like speculative fiction or magical science. Is sometimes what I call it, because when that earthquake happened in 2011, it was so big it shifted our whole planet on its axis. And since then, our Earth has spun faster, and it's actually shortened our year by like a fraction of a millisecond. So that's something that I think does feel like, to me, who can't understand physics, magical science. But it is rooted in something that really happened. So I'm just going to read also. I'm going to read the prologue, and then I'm going to read kind of a flashback. So this is narrated by Sora, and she's Japanese-Canadian, actually, so Vancouver does get a look in here. And she is just graduated high school as this novel begins. And it moves between her present and different memories in the past. So this is just the prologue. There's a catfish under the islands of Japan. That's what shakes everything up. The catfish twisting and turning in the mud beneath us. It rolls and the ground trembles. Water crashes, time cracks and breaks. I hate that fucking catfish. So that's why it's crossover in the US and Canada. They let me keep the swear word, but UK wouldn't let me keep it. It's true, it's true. Yeah, it's a bit maybe obvious in the prologue. You can really see it on the page. Okay, so the next part I'm going to read is Soda when she's 11 years old, and this is just after a really huge earthquake happened. She's with her father in the supermarket, and it's her father who's Canadian, and her mother is Japanese. Okay, so they've just left the supermarket. They're trying to get to a safe space. And then something happened. I didn't know what it was then, only that something had shifted in a way that had never taken place before, like the texture of the air thickened, or the temperature dropped, or the lights went out, except it wasn't any one of those things. It was the sensation of things switching, moving, fracturing. Dad felt it too. He lowered the phone from his ear and everybody around us paused, steadying themselves against each other or cars or the ground. On the radio, there was a sudden silence. It felt as though the world had stopped, and for a handful of heartbeats we all floated, suspended in space. My ears popped, and then gravity or momentum returned with a whoosh, like a huge wave breaking over the land. We were all thrown about, some backward, some forward, because it wasn't water or wind that had crashed over us. It was time. I think I fainted then because it was all black, and when my memory started again, Dad was holding me in his arms, even though I was too big for them, and we were at the roadblock that the police had set up. He was shouting at them, but they wouldn't let him through. From his arms, I stared up at the sky and saw that something was very wrong. The clouds looked like they had been shattered or cut by some gigantic knife. Over the building, smoke was trailing, but plumes right beside each other were rising faster and then slower, as if they were being tugged by different currents of air. I felt dizzy and sick, and I buried my face in Dad's chest. He was breathing rapidly, and I could hear his heart galloping. He put me on my feet. We have to go somewhere safer to wait. He held my hand and he walked so fast I had to jog to keep up. We weaved through cars and people, and I focused on the ground because I didn't want to see the nightmare sky. I noticed that my other hand was empty. I'd lost the ice cream I picked out in the supermarket for Mom. I shouted and Dad turned to me. What's wrong? I twisted out of his grip and started to run back towards the car, but there were so many people coming towards us, all trying to get away, that I was tangled up in legs and rushing bodies. Dad was yelling at me, but I couldn't stop and didn't until I felt his arms grab me and lift me roughly. What are you doing? He shouted. He shook me hard. The ice cream, I said. It's for Mom. I lost it. It's for her. Maybe it was the shaking that did it, but my tears came loose and I was crying. And Dad hugged me and then, without a word, took my hand again, and we made our way back up the hill with everyone else, trying to escape from whatever had happened behind us. We had been shaken. Our entire world shook. I'll just stop there. Okay. Great, thank you. So I guess the first kind of topic I want to talk about is, I guess, these disasters that are both mentioned very early on in both of our books. And Landscapes is set within and about disasters of different kinds. So I guess what made you decide on this sort of setting, this near future, with this element of backdrop of climate change that does center around flooding and drought?
So I actually stumbled across this topic. Initially, it was just meant to be a book about a woman in this ruinous house going through the objects. Then when I started studying more of these artworks, these ideas started emerging, because the way I do research is often just going through images and reading about particular artworks, and then allowing the ideas just to kind of develop very organically, as opposed to planning a novel. So this painting was one of the a pivotal painting. So this is Turner. And this is, I did Turner as part of my PhD, so I've been thinking about his works for a long time. And in this particular painting, it's meant to depict the rape of Proserpine, and she's in the corner, this corner, I can't really see, and you know, very, very barely visible figure. But in the center of the painting, in the background, there is a ruinous castle. And of course, there's the barren tree in the other corner of the painting. So this painting led me to think about the correspondence between different kinds of ruination. So there's the physical ruination of the house that I started with, and then I started looking at, you know, the ruination of nature and the ruination of a person. And so that's really where that idea began. And from Turner, I moved on to many other artists. And, you know, there are many artworks that are discussed in the book that represent violence against women. And you know, I'm very indebted to art historians who've done a lot of research on this subject. And it was very eye-opening to me to read about these sort of interpretation or reinterpretations of art history. And another inspiration in terms of the environmental changes, also Turner, and I wanted to include this because this is there is a central painting in the book which has a different title, A View on the Seine, and I had to change the title because we were worried about potential legal ramifications. So it's based on this painting, which is in the Gulbenkian in Lisbon, and it depicts a town on the Seine, and the town exists at the point where the tidal bore meets. So two tides of the river meet, and it's a place of great danger for ships because it's a place of shipwrecks. And Turner depicted a lot of maritime disasters. He was really fascinated by the sea and the effects of the sea. You probably can't. I don't know if this is visible but on the kind of lower right-hand side of the painting, there is a mast of a ship.
Oh, I think my caption probably is right over that.
Oh, no, it's not quite that far. It's hard. It's really hard to see probably you probably have to see up close, but there is a mast of a drowned ship. And Turner really responded to atmospheric changes in his work. There's now new research that suggests that the yellow that he depicted, the kind of Turnerian yellow, is actually the result of smog scattering sunlight. And as I recount it in the book, he left windows open in his studio. His studio was just in a state of complete disrepair, so the soot and the rain would fall onto these paintings, and the canvases became kind of encrusted with the soot of London. And so the artwork is literally a porous object. So I was interested in this idea of the artwork that takes in the elements of the environment. And I kind of wanted to play with that, you know, within the space of fiction.
And can I ask just about the Turnerian yellow? When you say that was the smog, like through the sunlight, do you mean that's what he would have seen? That's the color of the sky?
Yeah, you know, it's like when we get the fire, the wildfire haze, there is a kind of particular sort of like orangey yellow. It's from the scattering of sunlight.
So it's something that you can see painted, that he himself saw and painted, and then also like
I mean that's what historians theorize, because they matched meteorological records to the day around the time that he painted particular paintings, and how there would have been visibly in the sky changes in the atmosphere, which is really interesting.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
Sorry, I'm actually finding it hard to not just ask you lots more questions about this. I'm like, I've got to talk about my stuff. But I think, let me see, do I have next one? So just thinking about or talking about research. I do like research, or I guess I say I like it, but I guess I'm just sort of inevitably drawn into it. And I do a lot of following threads, kind of it's like almost like a breadcrumb trail. And what I love about research is when things begin to not even line up, but maybe in my imagination overlap, or I begin to see connections between all these different things. So I was first inspired by 311, and actually I was first inspired kind of like by the nuclear meltdown, which was the TEPCO plant in Fukushima Prefecture. And I started writing kind of like quite literally in this sort of magical realist sense about the effects of radiation. But as I researched it, and as I began to learn more and more about it, it was far too complex. It was too complex for me to try and depict the like how it affected the community, because within the communities affected, like it affected people in many different ways. There was like various ways of compensation that kind of divided people further, and that aspect was like too much for me to take on without this kind of like personal knowledge of it. But I did go. Oh, do you want to talk? We'll go back to it. I did go to several places in Tohoku, which is in like the northeast coast of Japan, and I wanted to see the places that had been affected. And this is actually the Memorial Museum in Iwate, and you can see how close the ocean is. Before the tsunami, all that was trees, so you couldn't actually see the ocean, and they were all swept away. They were totally destroyed. Right beside here, I don't know why I didn't include a photo of this, but there is a pine tree. This area is called Rikuzen Takata, and there was this one pine tree that survived, and it became this real symbol of like resilience and hope, that among all these pine trees that had been destroyed, one remained, and it's a really tall one. And it was an image I think like lots of people saw in the aftermath as a symbol of like hope and perseverance. And it's still there, but in this kind of interesting act of preservation, eventually the seawater had decayed it, so they've had to preserve the tree itself. And I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they did because it still looks like it's alive, but I think the roots had been damaged, that they had to do something to commemorate it and to keep it going. So it's very interesting to see it, but something that you see along the coast is a lot of, I guess, like flatness in this way. It's almost hard to say like how close this is to the ocean. So many places along the coast were fishing villages and relied on the sea and have a very deep connection with the ocean. And also something I'll just say about Tohoku is it's a very beautiful, wonderful place. And I think something very sad that has happened is in people's minds, especially outside of Japan, is Fukushima has kind of become this like very desolate place. But it's a very large prefecture, and the nuclear plant is in just one area, and there's a lot of beauty in this region of Japan. And then the catfish is a piece of folklore. The catfish is, like it says in the prologue, a story that this is what caused the earthquakes in Japan before people could understand what they were. It was underneath the islands. And there was a lot of art in the Edo period. And ukiyo-e, like woodblock prints, were really popular. They were a huge form, like a medium of like art and storytelling. So namazu-e was this whole genre, and namazu is catfish, e is art. And here's one of the catfish, and there's even a little small catfish I think looks cute. And apparently this is depicting an earthquake in maybe the pleasure district of Edo. So I read this depiction of it, which was like, you can see there's lots of people attacking the catfish, but the catfish apparently is very delighted to be touched by these beautiful women. So isn't like, he's kind of like looking sort of weirdly pleased there. But you could see, like, people are rushing to defend and fight against the catfish. It was certainly depicted as a creature that caused destruction. Everything was made of wood, so things would fall down and things would go on fire. But as I kept researching this, there was another sort of part of this artwork, which is the catfish as a means to distribute wealth in some ways, because after any earthquake, lots of merchants would get work. And this is sometimes it was satire, and sometimes it was sort of depicting just the catfish in a different way as a means through which the wealth would have been distributed from the very wealthy to like normal workers. So sometimes the catfish is sort of like, sometimes they're like thanks. And you can see here, there's like money raining down around the catfish as well. So it made me think differently about the figure or the idea of the catfish and disaster. Not to say that a disaster necessarily has positives, but that it can be viewed in different ways. And in this way, the earthquake is not a force of evil. It's a thing that happens, and it's how we like adapt to it. So that was a lot of my research. And yeah, I guess like I wouldn't. It's funny because I wouldn't have been like, oh, art inspires me, but this like actually played like a huge role in how it was depicted. And yes.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I felt like the way that you represented catastrophe in Catfish Rolling was very moving and poignant, and how there are these different zones, the different temporalities. I think that really captured the ways in which disaster fractures not just the land itself, but of course the collective psyche of the country and individual psyches, and just it shatters the belief in like stability and in impermanence, which I think we kind of tend to
I think that's something I could see in landscapes as well. And you did like specifically mention this, the idea of like the big house. Well, in Ireland we would call those houses the big houses. It's not that imaginative, but those symbols of, I guess, particularly British wealth and how that is crumbling in landscapes is a wonderful like physical space where that's happening as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I've been to those great houses, and many people go there for spas, for afternoon teas, but there's very little information about how, those were houses that were funded through colonialism and through slavery. And I know a couple of years ago, the National Trust in England, they did publish a report about 93 properties in their care that are linked to colonial history. And that was quite controversial, and people don't want to be reminded of that reality. But actually, I found that duality very fascinating, that, we've collectively accepted as beautiful these houses and these artworks, but they're actually very problematic. And Zabel describes this really movingly in his novels, how the building of these great houses actually necessitated the destruction of forests. So the landscaped park, which looks very beautiful, is in fact a construction, and they had to remove peasants. All these villages that were unsightly were removed. They created artificial lakes. So everything that's that we see often through film and TV, all of that is a form of artifice that has behind it this history of destruction. So I just found the two sides of that kind of architecture really interesting. Yeah.
I guess it's coming back as well to like the aestheticization.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I think you mentioned fracturing there. I'm trying to think, do I have... wait. We've gone out of order. That's okay. I just want to show a few things, because you mentioned fracturing and about the psyche. And for Catfish, the reason I kind of had this idea for these places, like the actual setting where time changed, was also because of going to some of these places. But it's interesting, they've also in Tohoku preserved a lot of the buildings where you can see the damage. So it's a little hard to see, but if you see on this building, there's sort of like a picture of like a wave and a cloud. Just below that, there's a sign that shows where the tsunami reached. This is 14.3 meters. You've got great photos. I took these, which is why they're a bit hard to see, but something they've done is preserved the destruction in a very interesting kind of evocative way. And this is just as it is. And I went to a few other places. This was a school, which they turned into a memorial museum. All the students got out of here safely, and the staff. There's a car that was swept there. And again, because I'm not a very good photographer, I couldn't really capture this, but this is the third floor of the building. And a lot of things were they managed to preserve things as they were. I'm going to just skip, sorry, I know we're going all over the place. But this was inside a house. I actually had to go on a tour to go inside some of the areas that had been evacuated because of the radiation. And the tour guide knew the people who had lived here, so that's why it was okay to take a picture in through the window. So when people evacuated because of the nuclear meltdown, they had to leave very quickly. So you can see things were very preserved. This is almost 10 years after. And the moss on the ground has grown up through the tatami mat of the floor. So what I found in lots of these places was a preservation, like things had just been left, and also like many, many years had passed. And I think something that can happen with trauma is this sort of being held in time. And when I was reading about people who had survived and experienced disasters, something that really stuck with me was people were in temporary housing, and then without communities and structure and their homes and jobs, people said that every day felt the same. People said that they felt like they were caught in time. And I think that is a very common response to things like trauma and disaster. And I was interested in kind of placing that in a physical sense, which makes it easier to write about, I think, in some ways. And I guess like on this topic of trauma in landscapes, there are these different elements of trauma. For example, while the assault of Penelope survives, there's the trauma of extinction or impending extinction, and then human displacement. There's a lot of human displacement in this. But something I noticed and really admired was in the book how things were withheld and restrained, how things were not shown, or not depicted in explicit detail. A lot of it was about the before and after of some of these ruptures. And I just wondered, like, was that what you instinctively felt you wanted to do in representing this? Or, like, was it a stylistic choice? How did you feel drawn to doing it in that way?
So it was definitely both a question of aesthetics, but also ethics. I think that when we represent acts of violence, there is the risk of replicating it or fetishizing it. There's just so much spectacle of violence in popular media, so I wanted to avoid that. And I was really influenced by various novels that also have this indirect approach. So everything from Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles to Teju Cole's Open City. So those novels also address sexual violence without, depicting anything really directly. And I'm just very inspired by artworks that also use this kind of oblique method to represent catastrophe. And so to kind of go back to our photos,
I think I know the one.
Yeah, there are quite a few. So both of these. So maybe we'll go with Ishiuchi Miyako. So this is going slightly different catastrophe. This is the Second World War. And so Ishiuchi Miyako, all of her photographic projects respond to themes of memory and trace and what remains of the past. And for this particular project, she photographed the clothing left behind by the people who perished during the atomic bomb. And part of her goal is to portray, I guess, the everydayness and the normality of the lives that these people lived, which were, of course, taken away from them suddenly one morning in August of 1945. And she wanted to portray that, these were women who cared about fashion. This is a very beautiful piece of clothing. And people had aspirations and they had their goals that were completely removed from this wider context of the war. And so there is this indirectness. So there's no body shown, obviously. There's no spectacle. But I found the photos of the clothing and the fact that the referent is the absent body. And I found that extremely moving. And in landscapes, I discuss the works of the Colombian sculptor Doris Salcedo, who has projects that respond to the political violence in Colombia. And she has these sculptures that are essentially like ordinary wooden chairs, but she encases them in concrete. And I saw one once in New York. it doesn't sound like much when you describe it, but they're so moving because it's just the weight of the concrete and the fact that this chair, which is meant to be a place for rest and comfort, has become a place that makes rest impossible. And so they're all very kind of metaphoric. And I don't know about the other one. I don't know if we need a trigger warning for this. So this is one of the most famous photos to have come out of the post-war era. So Kawada was accompanying another photographer to Hiroshima to photograph the aftermath. And he noticed these stains on the walls of what they call the A-bomb dome. And these are actually, it's like the shadows on the walls, these are actually human remains. But the photographs are extremely abstract. So he wanted to show the literal traces of the life that have been left behind. So this is obviously a lot more horrific and harrowing than the clothes. But again, I think it's just the indirectness and sort of finding a different layer to catastrophe and not just kind of direct representation.
I think with this one really struck me because when you sent these along kind of with you didn't send any explanation like as you sent them, but I thought this was water. I thought this was the tide coming in or out, from like an aerial point of view. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? I was like, oh, look at the movement, like look at the shape, look at the changes, until you described it. And then I think the jolt comes from trying to realize what it is, because I think we can't really fully understand the breadth or depth of this like act of war, but really any, right, from at least my very privileged standpoint. So I think the kind of struggle to understand what it is part of trying to understand how these things happen. And I think like that indirectness lens, it's like you have to work harder, I think. We need to take a moment after that. I think, talking about forms. Can we talk about form? Okay. So I really like playing with form and structure in all kinds of writing. And something, I guess I did this more with Songs for Ghosts than Catfish. Catfish is a back and forth structure of memory. But Songs for Ghosts, I wanted to create a feeling of echoes. So there's a diary, another diary, and there's a kind of current day protagonist, and there's stories within stories and music and people telling and retelling things. And I wanted to do that to see how those kind of forms of storytelling I could play against each other. And then in landscapes, I felt it was doing something very interesting with hybridity. It's speculative. I think, do we talk about this? Like, how is a term just speculative often or not?
I mean, people do say it's speculative, but I think that's largely a marketing term.
Yeah, many of these things are marketing. It's literary fiction, but it erases lots of those boundaries between things. And then it's looking at these artistic and societal limitations that are particularly imposed, I guess, really specifically on women, gender and power and how that's abused. And then because of the displacement of people, I guess, in some ways, people who have been forced to migrate because of climate. And I guess I want to ask you about that fluidity that I can see within genre and within identity as well.
That's a really great question. Like you, I really care about form, and form is what I always start a project with. I think about form and structure first and foremost. And with landscapes, it began with the diary. I'm fascinated by the diary. Any kind of ekphrastic novel, works of fiction that respond to art. Yes. A different kind, but also epistolary novels that incorporate letters and diaries, just because I think that the fragmentariness and the kind of provisional, unfinished quality of a diary it's somehow more suitable for capturing someone's mind, the way that someone thinks.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about fictional diary is that we get to see the character as a writer, and the way that the character constructs themselves, because the diary is also, it is a form of construction or artifice, right? So people are not fully honest with themselves in the pages of a diary. So I found that the tension between what it reveals and what it conceals very interesting. And I read a lot of writers' diaries. The diaries of Franz Kafka and Virginia Woolf were very important to me during the writing, and just to look at the ways in which they trace the movements of someone's mind, and their dreams and their fears, and how all of that interacts with just really banal things in daily life. Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about the diary form in Songs for Ghosts?
I think, I agree with everything you said, except I didn't really read diaries of famous people so much. But I did read things that were sort of contemporaneous, because the diary in Songs for Ghosts is set in early 1910s. It starts in the early 1910s in Nagasaki. And I thought it was a great way of juxtaposing voice, because the other narrator is today. And it was that kind of maybe way of thinking about language or vocabulary. All those practical things really helped with the voice on the page. But I was really interested in how it's quite different from like a or any other point of view when you're writing it, because the character is like you said, constructing it, or they're remembering something and trying to record it, and it's unreliable. That's the other thing as well. Like you said, people sometimes aren't honest with themselves. It creates a very interesting, unreliable narrator. And then in Songs for Ghosts, an actual physical record that is then found by the other character. So it is like this kind of physical object as well. Something I wanted to do, because the diary writer is learning English, I wanted to try and show the progression of language as she became more at ease in it. It was too hard. I couldn't do it. It was just it was just too difficult. And I tried, and it was too hard. Sometimes you just have to try things and it's too hard, and you're like, well, I'll just talk about it later. But I think anything that's got a constraint is interesting to me. I find that very helpful. What time is it? I'm just aware of the time. 6. One more?
Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about identity, because you mentioned that a bit?
Yeah, I think I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about this as well, if you want to. But I guess in my novels, identity, especially multiracial identity, is quite central, and it is also because the characters are young adults, when I think it's a time when there's a lot of working out of identity happening anyway. But like for people who are multiracial or are coming from different like cultures or heritages, it's like more obvious. And I guess it was more in line with some of my experiences because I grew up in Ireland, where there wasn't very many other, I'm going to say foreigners. Sometimes we're still called the foreigners. We've been living in that house for like 20 years. But for me, that was something that I thought was important to represent and to think about. But I don't think that has to be or is the experience of every, well, even young person, any person who is multiracial at all. I think sometimes it's a question that can be imposed on us in different ways. So I want to like definitely acknowledge it's not like everybody with this background experience is the same thing. But in the end, with all of those, what I wanted to get to was a space where many things could happen at once, where there didn't have to be choices or decisions that had to be between like binary things. I wanted something that was much more like encompassing and had room for that, and like didn't have kind of answers in that way. So that was what was important for me with this kind of fluidity and change, I guess, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting that you had these different layers of fluidity, the fluidity of identity, of space and time, but also of different genres.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I know we talked about identity when we were over coffee, and something that has always struck me as a reader, so before I even started writing, is I think there are pressures placed upon female writers of color to write a certain type of narrative. I didn't fully understand how strong that pressure is until I started publishing. But from the beginning, I wanted to push back against that. And so it was a deliberate choice to erase all markers of identity from the character Penelope. And what's been really interesting is to see people's reaction to that. Because really what I wanted to address is the assumptions that people have about characters, but also about the relationship between author and character. So I think that what people assume about the character, which is completely not there in the book, I think speaks volumes about how we read and what we expect. So I was more interested in that aspect. And I think the other side to it is I'm terrified about writing anything personal. I find
really?
I think it takes tremendous amount of courage to put oneself out there like that. And I mean, maybe someday I will be able to. So for me, distance is very important. I need distance from the character and the character's experiences. That lends me clarity.
You're not going to like this, but I think Penelope has is trying to create distance as well.
Yeah, I guess
between
so.
herself. Sorry. It happened anyway. Yeah, but I think that was something that the diary manages to do as well, is her trying to create a distance as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Thought of that.
Sometimes these themes only come up on a panel and you're like, oh, look what I did. Look what I did there, yeah. We had loads more to talk about, but I think we've kind of run out of time. But can I ask you about your new work?
Oh, yes. So I'm working on a second novel, and it's set in Tokyo, like you mentioned in your introduction. And it is mainly about photography. So the protagonist is a photographer, and it's also about the relationship, a friendship that she has with an older female artist. And it's written in kind of short vignettes, because I feel like the vignette is the literary form that corresponds to the photograph, a kind of snapshot. And I've done so much research. It's been so fun to do the research, just reading about different photographers' works. And I really wanted to include photographers that are lesser known, including female photographers and Japanese photographers, to kind of counterbalance, I think, the current conversation in which Western and male photographers dominate. So I just kind of hope to contribute to that conversation.
Oh, I like this idea of the vignettes being like a photo.
Oh, I'm glad.
That's cool.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you want to talk about Songs for Ghosts?
Well, I guess I sort of talked about it. So, do I need to talk about it more? I mean, I guess something that made me think of like the theme for this lecture series was because when I applied for the position, I was working on a project which I guess it's just like at a middle stage at the moment, which is all about islands. And again, in my research often looks like a holiday, but I went to lots of islands along the west coast of Ireland, and it's a graphic novel, but I've just written the text because I can't do any art. But I was sort of inspired by a historical figure, but also the form of the imrama, which is a really old Irish form of voyage. And it's like, if you think of like Sinbad or, those, I mean, we've got lots in Ireland, like St. Brendan, who discovered America. I don't know if anybody knew that. He did, our saint. It's this form of voyage where, you're in a vessel and things are happening along the way. It's creatures or islands or magic or different things that are being encountered. And I was very interested in that form of storytelling, as well as, again, islands and the ocean. So that's something I hope will happen. I have an illustrator, but graphic novels, as his agent said, take a long time, are expensive to make, and you won't get any money for it. So that's why I started a new project while I was here. Well, I think we should hand it over to questions.
That sounds really fascinating.
There's lots more images. You can ask us at dinner. We'll show you the PowerPoint or something.
Switch to a nicer looking image.
I kind of forgot it was. Is this a nicer one?
I don't know.
No.
We didn't get to talk about this because this was actually from the an exhibition at the UBC Museum of Anthropology.
Yeah.
So this is from the Tohoku. A team collected photos that were lost during the tsunami, and they cleaned them. So it's an ongoing project because when photographs come in contact with salt water, the salt crystals corrode the surface of the photo, so hence these kind of voids. And I just thought it was, and so at the exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology, you saw just an entire wall of these photos. So I got, this is from the exhibition catalog that I got. And I just thought this was so moving, and it captures a lot of, what you address in your book with these, the fracturing and the voids and that experience of loss and grief.
Yeah. And I guess the recreation restoration is a real act of care. Yeah. Like, I find that very beautiful. Yeah. I know a lot of stuff washed up here.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, maybe this is like very widely known, that like a motorbike.
Oh, yes.
There was like parts of a motorbike that washed up, I think, on Vancouver Island. Yeah, and then someone on the island reconstructed it and sent it back to Japan. Like, they found who had lost it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I know, that's cool. I don't know how they did that, but I thought that was like a very beautiful story. Yeah. And on that note, we can go to questions if anybody has them.